that, I want us to think about the different stages where we will consider where human rights issues are at play. First, we're going to talk about police encounters, think about conduct on the street by police officers. Then I want to take us to the right to counsel, the ability to obtain a lawyer for your representation. And then I want to talk about punishment, and then thinking about life beyond prison, like what we do to or for people who are exiting prison, and how that brings up human rights issues as well. So when we think about human rights, let's kind of just try to get on the same page with what are we talking about? What's a human right? Can someone help us out? Like, what is a human right? Anybody? No one? Well, that's great. So then let's talk about it, because maybe people aren't really sure. But let me just kind of venture to say that many frameworks think about human rights as a matter of being grounded in dignity, right? Human dignity. That is, you have rights that flow from the fact of you being a human being. That is, that's the dignity part. And then there's also the notion that we're equal before the law, right? Like you and I are not obviously equal, right, in a sort of empirical sense, but before the law, we are equal. And that is another underlying aspect of human rights in the framework. In the United Nations Charter, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there's the belief that all people have special value that's just simply tied into being human. It has nothing to do with class, race, gender, etc. Nothing but being human. And so what I want us to recognize is that human rights, the way we're talking about it now, when we think about dignity, dignity didn't always have this meaning. It really had like a kind of a bougie type meaning in the sense that you were a baron, or you had some title of nobility, or you had something that distinguished you from those peasants over there, right? And so dignity meant you were a dignitary, really. And so you had status based on your status, who you were in that society. And that's what gave you your ability to enforce rights, et cetera. But the Declaration of Human Rights and the human rights framework has pretty much flipped that on its head. You don't have to be of royalty. You don't have to be of clergy, right? Everyone gets human rights by virtue of your own morality, by virtue of your own humanity, right? Being human, right? And so this is something that in some way, shape, or form, the world religions have all recognized, right? That humans have some inherent dignity, and that human rights flow from that dignity naturally. At least in the Abrahamic traditions, when we think about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, this idea that humans are made in the image of God, right? That we're like a replica, we're an image of God. And in that sense, there's this type of dignity that flows from that. Even in the Hindu worldview, when you think about the Atma and Paramatma, right? There's this idea that we're all equal in this other metaphysical sense that comes out into the real world, right? And so we've taken some of these ideas, even in our punishment jurisprudence, because in the death penalty context, we talk about the dignity of man, right? The dignity of man is what dictates that when we kill someone, we do it properly, right? So that's how we've used that thus far, but hopefully we're going to push those boundaries. But that's how dignity has come into play in the capital context. We want to make sure someone is dignified when we put that person to death. So you might think that that runs really counter, and it does in some ways, to the idea of human rights. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So if we have a sense of what human rights are, then what are the detractors? What are the things that are not human rights, right? What kind of things do we talk about? What detracts from one's human rights? So if it's dignity, think about what? Humiliation, degradation, alienation, dispossession of your body, right? When someone assaults you or detains you or rapes you or even kills you, killing being the ultimate dispossession of your body, right? those are detractors of human rights. Those are the things we look at as being antithetical to human rights. And so I want to be thinking about those types of detractors in light of a dignity, equality before the law framework as we go through and really think about our criminal justice system or the legal system, how you want to call it. And so I do want to just lay out a disclaimer. I'm not a scholar of human rights. I haven't really written anything on this area in my whole career. But you'll see the issues I've been dealing with in the punishment system, in law enforcement, all bear directly on human rights. So I've been working in the area kind of without even knowing it, because what we do, what I study, inculcates human rights at multiple levels, as we'll see. So I do want to lay out that little disclaimer. Let's talk about police conduct. And again, we want to think about what implications here, dignity, equality, et cetera, right? So we all know a stop and frisk, what a stop and frisk is. So a police officer can stop you and ask you questions, regardless of whatever's going on. Hey, what's up? How's your day going? Everything cool? You don't have to talk to the police officer. But if the police officer says, I need to talk to you, I'm investigating something, we're suspecting you of committing a crime, that's different. Then there's some reasonable suspicion to stop you. And then to get to this point of frisking, that's another level of suspicion. But so many police departments in this country, Chicago, especially New York, we're stopping and frisking people left and right with no reasonable suspicion whatsoever. And how many people here, just by, maybe it's not fair, but if you care to, how many have ever been stopped and frisked? Yeah, well, I would expect that, but if you think about it, if you've never experienced that, boy, let me talk about a humiliating experience. Let me tell you what, it's not very nice when people are walking by looking at you. It's not nice when you're shaking so hard. Your legs are shaking so hard because you're in this position, right? And so this happens, and one of the major problems with being stopped and frisked and interrogated is that police encounters like that set the conditions for further engagement. So now if they've got some sort of, even if they didn't have reasonable suspicion, they find something on you, right? If you say something incriminating, it may very well lead to probable cause, which can lead to an arrest. So these types of encounters aren't very innocuous when you think about the downstream consequences. Racial profiling, and of course, this horrific killing of Ronald Green. If you don't know about this case, do not watch the video if you don't want to have nightmares. If you don't want to hear somebody screaming out Jesus's name, right, for the beating and the killing he's taken for no other reason, he got pulled over, right? And so this is one of the most, I've seen a lot of stuff in my time, and this is one of the most horrific ones. So there's, killings and beatings, even detainment. Sandra Bland, with this thing that happened in Texas, she got pulled over and eventually got dragged out of her car for some parking violation, or I'm sorry, some transportation violation. And then she ends up dead a few days later in her cell. And lots of issues around that type of thing happening. And it happens pretty frequently, as the professor was saying, people can get incarcerated or even jailed and end up dying because of conditions in the jail or the treatment of the staff in jail. So these kinds of things, and try to recognize, George Floyd and Philando Castile and Oscar Grant and all of these killings that we've seen, we're just getting to see some of the stuff that's been happening forever, but now we got cameras and we can see things. And so George Floyd kind of kicks off this new era of police-oriented reform. But we can also think about, what do you think about this idea when Michael Brown was killed in St. Louis, right, in Ferguson? What happened to his body? Does anyone know? Do you know? So his body laid out there, a dead body, blood coming from the head, laid out there for 4 hours in the sun. And police wouldn't even let the family come and tend to the body. No, again, I'm not the human rights guru, but that seems like a gross violation of some people's religious beliefs, and just the dignity that I'm trying to get across. Not just the dignity of the person who's laying there, but the family of this individual can't get to the body 4 hours you're looking at your child there, and the police will not let you through. These are the kind of issues that I think raise significant human rights issues. And, you know, I just feel I teach criminal law, I teach criminal procedure. Criminal procedure is the law that governs police. So what the police can and can't do. And so I can speak all day on the type of misconducts that lead to human rights violations if we think about dignity and equality, et cetera. And of course, the equality issue is not everybody gets stopped and frisked. These police officers in New York and Chicago, they were focusing on the minority neighborhoods. They weren't even in the sort of wealthier minority neighborhoods. They were in poor minority neighborhoods, creating hotspots. And so it's not that, you know, the people from Wall Street were getting shaken down and that sort of thing, even though it's a fact that people commit crimes in equal proportions, regardless if you're high or low class, right? And so we could talk more about that, but happy to entertain questions and to think about this more. Now, one of the, you know, sort of premier rights to think about is, what right do you have to enforce other rights, right? Or what ability do you have to, because we talk about the right to counsel in criminal procedure as being the mother of all rights, or sort of the kingpin of all rights, because without a lawyer, it's hard to enforce all of the rights that you do have. And so it's critical. All those rights and sort of constitutional rights that you have, or privileges, et cetera, can all be stripped away if you don't have someone to help you enforce the right. And so not having right to counsel leads to tons of false confessions. If you haven't seen the book, The Process is the Punishment by Malcolm Feely, check out that book. It's all about people who confess falsely to crimes simply to get out of the criminal justice system, simply to get out. I've got kids at home, I'm in jail. I've got a job to get back to, I've got to pay this, I've got to get back to my life. I will take this plea bargain just so I can get back to my life, right? And so false confessions happen quite a bit just to get out of the system. I would rather take the misdemeanor on my record than have to spend another, 4 or 5 months in prison, or in jail rather. Those are problems. Plea bargaining. Sometimes even when you get counsel, it's like you don't have counsel. Why? Because we like to think that our legal system is like a zero-sum game. Your lawyer is going to duke it out Mayweather style against the other and going to win for you, right? That's what you think is going to happen. No. Lots of times people go into the courtroom or go into the litigation expecting to make a handshake and make a deal. They go in expecting to make a deal, not to fight for you, but to just get you off their docket. Public defenders have enormous workloads, and they don't get paid very much. They don't get much money for investigation for your case. And so for them, they're just trying to get the case disposed, onto the next. And so unfortunately, this has really almost killed the trial completely. We like to think about a trial and before a jury and before a judge. Almost no criminal cases get disposed of that way. At the federal level, only about 2% of cases actually go to trial. Everything else gets plea bargain. Everything else it's a deal, it's a handshake that gets made between the prosecution and the defense, right? And so without having counsel as well, you don't know what other constitutional rights you're giving up. Right, a right to a jury trial, for example, et cetera. So without a right to counsel, and I believe that this is where a lot of the trouble for people in the criminal legal system really begins, is that they either don't have viable counsel, or the counsel that they get is overworked, trying to make a deal. And so for those of you who know, not everybody gets this guy, right? Not everybody gets this guy who's willing to go to the ends for R. Kelly, right? So public defenders are kind of, unfortunately, in a different situation than someone that you can pay top dollar to. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, back to the equality issue, justice shouldn't depend on how much money you have in your pocket, but our system, unfortunately, is built around a financial model. And so people can get off, if you have the money, to hire a staff of attorneys to get you through. right? So all kinds of implications here, but really the downstream consequences. One of the things that you should know that when you do a plea bargain, lots of times that forecloses any opportunity to appeal your case. You are saying, I did it, give me the punishment, no possibility of appeal.